but I'm on the mend and I'm getting there and I'm thankful to be back. It feels like a lifetime ago since I was here and saw all of y'all. And I want to personally thank so many of you. I receive phone calls and text messages, people offering to bring me things, people telling me to stay home and rest up. Just thank you for thinking of me and for the prayers and so many things. We got back the day after Christmas, or we got back Christmas night. And the day after Christmas, I got sick, and I've been sick since. So Jessica's taking care of me. Um, 10 years ago, before Jessica, I got sick. Whew, I'd had nobody. So very thankful for that. Bear with me in my voice, all right? So, as I said, we got back from Christmas. Many of us just finished a time of year where we were able to spend time with our families, right? Now, I don't know what your family does when you get together, but if you're like mine, we reminisce. You know what I mean? We talk about how life used to be. We remember silly stories of growing up. We poke fun at one another for the silly things they did or that we did to them. During the holidays, I've noticed that my family seems to talk more, laugh harder, and stay around longer the more we reminisce. In fact, the stories of our past, the memories, tend to deepen our relationship with each other and keep us connected in a way that others who do not have those stories to share can't connect. This is true with my family, it's true with my friends as well. I don't know what kind of friends you have, but if you've had friends that have been friends of yours for 10, 20, 30 years or longer, when you get together, the stories come out, don't they? Even the stories that y'all have told over and over and over again, you can't help but when you get together, talk about the glory days or talk about the mistakes of the past or just laugh together. I believe one of the things that keeps a friendship, especially a long term friendship, going is sharing stories of the past. It's remembering all those things that got us to this point. I heard a comedian this week, well, actually heard this comedian say a lot of things this week that we won't talk about. But one of the things this comedian said was when he grew up as a child, what he wanted to be was different than what a lot of other people wanted to be. And when pressed on what that was, he said, I wanted to be God's friend. I can think of no better friendship, no better thing to want than to be a friend of God's. And what's beautiful about that is God actually offers that friendship. It's a friendship that God's been working on even before we were born. But just like our earthly friendships, one of the things we need to do when it comes to our friendship with God is to remember. We need to remember the way God has guided us, provided for us, cared for us, and sustained us. When we fail to take time to remember all that God has done, we are in danger of forgetting Him altogether. So this morning, as we start out 2024, I want us to remember God. I want us to remember what God has done for us throughout the years. Because the more we take time to remember what God has done for us in the past, I believe the stronger our relationship will be with Him in the present. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to learn the lesson of how important this morning it is for us to remember our God. And we're going to do that by listening to God's words to Israel, specifically what we find in Deuteronomy 8 and Deuteronomy 6. I want us to begin in Deuteronomy 8. We're going to look at verses 10 through 18 together. It'll be up here. He begins, when you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land He has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you to this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land, with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble and test you, so that in the end it might go well with you. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors, as it is today. In Deuteronomy, there are a lot of directives to Israel to remember God. If you read over Deuteronomy, you're going to get that tone. Remember, remember, remember. And it makes sense. Deuteronomy is the law being told a second time. They need to remember what all God has done. And when we get here to Deuteronomy 8, Israel is being instructed to remember God again. And listen to what was said at the very beginning of what we read together. When you have eaten and are satisfied, do what? Praise the Lord your God. Why? For the good land he has given you. Remember, Israel had been set free from 400 years of Egyptian bondage, but they had also been wandering in a wilderness for 40 years. They've had no permanent home. Everything they had to eat and drink were miraculously provided for them by God. But they were about to receive the blessing of the promised land, a land that would keep them full and satisfied. And God says, as you eat, as you get full, remember that it is the Lord your God that gave you this land. The very next verse, Israel is told, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. So, right after he says, praise God for the land, he then says, be careful not to forget the Lord your God. In all these blessings you receive, don't forget the gift giver. Just because God changes the way he feeds you doesn't mean he's still not the one providing the food. They would no longer receive miraculous food the way they did in the desert. Now they would plant it and grow it and harvest it. They would also have more than just a day's worth of food like they did in the wilderness. They would have food to store up for days and months. But in that plenty, there is a danger. In those blessings that they had prayed for 40 years, there's a danger. And that danger is they would forget the one who was actually providing it. And notice how the writer describes what it looks like to forget God in the very next verse. Failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you this day. The forgetting of God in Deuteronomy 8 is not so much a memory thing as it is a submissive living thing. Israel's not going to have amnesia toward God. They're not going to forget God totally. They're not going to even stop calling God their God or Yahweh their God. The danger is they will stop living the way God has called them to live. They will stop doing life the way God has set up for life to be. They will forget his commands, his laws, and his decrees. Those who forget God start living however they choose to want to live. This was and is the sign for those who forget God. Pause. What's interesting, this is not the first time in Deuteronomy Israel is warned of the danger of forgetting God. If we go just 2 chapters earlier in Deuteronomy 6 for what Tyler read for us, it sounds almost the exact same thing. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then, when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do what? Don't forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Deuteronomy 6 ends this passage the same way we began in Deuteronomy 8, which is when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord. Everything Israel enjoys, whether it was in the wilderness or whether it will be in the promised land, is a gift from God. They are being warned not to forget the one who's provided them all these blessings. And notice that the forgetting God in Deuteronomy 6 and 8 stems from the plenty that they have. Go to verses 12 through 14 of Deuteronomy 8. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, that satisfied is huge there. When you eat and are satisfied, when you build what? Fine houses, when you settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, what happens? Your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God. The more Israel was given, the better they had it, the greater the danger of personal pride, of self-confidence, and of forgetting God. Because they will forget that they haven't done anything to truly deserve and receive this plenty. It was all a gift of God. Nothing they could do could earn it aside from God helping them earn it. No abilities they have that God did not give them could they produce all this stuff. That is why in Deuteronomy 6 it says, cities you did not build, right? Houses with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. I'm being very careful not to get to us yet, all right? Because I really want to get to us right now. But we're going to stay with Israel and God, okay? Both passages teach the very same idea. Everything Israel had was a gift. They earned nothing. They were recipients of a God who knows how to give good gifts. I'm going to repeat that. They were recipients of a God who knew how to give good gifts. But Israel also served a God who knew exactly what type of mistakes they would make with these good gifts. They would become prideful, and they would become forgetful, and they would start to think they deserved what they had. It was their right to have these things. It was because they were good people that they had these things. It was because they worked hard to earn these things. They would believe it was their things. Once again, I'm going to be careful not to go to us. God's hope for Israel is to remember him. If they want to avoid living in conflict with God, if they want to avoid living rebellious lives of self-indulgence, they must remember that it is God who has done all of this for them. It is God who they cried out to for 400 years to set them free. It is God who they cried out to for 40 years in the wilderness for food and for drink and for protection and for shelter, and God gave it to them. Deuteronomy 8:14-16. God says, or the writer says, God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. Doesn't that sound glorious? That's the type of trip we all want to take, especially for 40 years. He brought you water out of a hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known. All this protection of Israel's past, this providential care, in the very next verse, the writer says, this was done to humble and test you, so that in the end it might go well with you. Israel had a very difficult road to the promised land, but the road was difficult for a reason. They needed to know, they needed to never forget who led them, who cared for them, who protected them, who sustained them. The love and care of God in the desert was there to humble the hearts of Israel so their future with God might go well. But over time, Israel would be in danger of losing that humbled heart. Once again, the writer in Deuteronomy says, in Deuteronomy 8:17-18, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. Given enough time and a lack of focus on God's miraculous care, Israel would forget God. Enough time and enough forgetfulness, Israel would forget God. So what is the answer for Israel? What will keep Israel from forgetting God? And what's beautiful is God tells them. After the passage that Tyler read for us in Deuteronomy 6, or before the passage that Tyler read for us in Deuteronomy 6, God gives us the answer. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you, to observe in the land that you are crossing to Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and the children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. He sets it up. How do you make sure you don't forget God? And remember, not forgetting God is to keep his commands and his laws and decrees, right? He says, what I'm about to tell you is how you will continue to do that. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. What are they to do? Love the Lord, your God, with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today, start listening. If you haven't, start listening, are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Hide them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and your gates. This was the way God planned for Israel to remember all that he had done, for them to continue in his commands and laws and decrees. It's that they would remember the love of the Lord by continually talking about the love and care and will of the Lord. They were to talk about it so much that the love of God would be written on their hearts. They were to talk about it so much that the love of God would be impressed upon their children. When they sat at home, when they walked along the road, when they finished their day, when they began their day, they were to talk about all that God had done for them. They were to make symbols that would remind them of God. They were to write down reminders about their God, to put those reminders in places where they could always see it. And when you look at the history of Israel, they had festivals, memorial feasts. They would gather and make sacrifices and offerings, and these were all done to remember and honor what God had done for them. They were done so they would never forget all that the Lord had done for them and continued to do for them. Let's get to us. We too must remember and make sure never to forget the love of our God. We need to share the stories of our God. We need to talk about the ways God has provided for us, cared for us, protected us, and guided us. When we sit down with friends, with family, with our children, when we sit down with our church family, the stories of God need to be shared. The stories of the God of the Bible, but also the stories of the God of the past week and the past months and the past years. God isn't just a God that worked in Scripture. God is a God that works every day and has worked in our lives. So when we sit down with our children, we should tell them about the God who parted the Red Sea for Israel. But we should also talk about the God who provided transportation to the game they needed to be at, the God who provided the school clothes they needed, the God who gave an abundance of food for them that they could not get on their own. When we sit down with our friends, we should talk about the God who forgave and changed Saul into Paul, but also the God who forgave and changed us, the God who forgave us of our greed and our lust and our pride, the God who is changing us, transforming us into his image. When we talk to our spouse, we should talk about the way God brought Jacob and Rachel together, but also the way God brought us together. We should talk about the way God has developed within us a deeper love and appreciation for each other and for him, the way our God has shown us to be better communicators and more committed to one another. When we gather together to worship, we should talk about the God of judges who forgave his people over and over again. We should talk about the Jesus of the Gospels who shows us the true character and nature of God. But we should also talk about the God who has worked in the hearts of men and women here at Holmes Road, the God who brought us out of addiction, abuse, and hopelessness, the God who forgave us when we and others wouldn't, the God who has helped us to love someone we thought was unlovable. Without conversations and testimonies like these, we are doomed to forget God. We are destined to live lives in rebellion against his commands, laws, and decrees. We are in danger of exchanging our humility for self-confidence and pride. We will start to look at all the things we have and think, look at what I've earned. Look at what I've done. Look at all that I've accomplished. We'll start to wonder why others aren't working as hard as us, why others need help when we didn't, because we've forgotten our God. We've stopped telling the stories of when we were destitute and God brought us out of that, when we had no job and God gave us one, when we didn't have a clue what to do in our job and God opened our minds to understand and to learn. We'll start to think we are without sin when we forget how deep in the mire we once were. When we stop telling the stories of what God has done in our lives, and when we stop listening to the stories of what God has done in each of your lives, we are doomed to forget God. I, this morning, am thankful for a God who has done far more than I can possibly imagine. A God who continues to help me transform. A God who has surrounded me with brothers and sisters that pray for me, that write to me, that call me, that text me, that sit down and talk with me, that will counsel me, that will forgive me, and that will truly show me the love of a God, the love of God on a constant basis. I am thankful for a God who has never given up on me. I am thankful for a God who has given me a wife who shows me patience, trustworthiness, and the closest thing to unconditional love that I've seen since my mother and aunt. I used to laugh and make a joke whenever Jess would compliment me on something. I'd say, "You have to say that." Then I realized, no, you don't. You choose to say that. You chose to say yes and to marry me. She shows me what God has chosen to do. I never want to forget all that God has done for me. I never want to think I deserved any of it. I never want to think I have earned any of it. And I never want to think I am better than what I really am, which is a broken sinner saved by a wonderful God. So I need to talk about what God has done. I need you to share with me and others what God has done in your life. Maybe if we do a better job of recognizing what God has done, we will better see and appreciate what He is currently doing. I thank you for 16 and a half years of being at Holmes Road. I thank God for 45 and a half years of protecting me and loving me and putting people around me. Listen, we're not perfect. We're a broken family, but we have a God who has kept us together. There's nothing special about Holmes Road. There's something special about the God who counsels and leads Holmes Road. We serve that God. I gave my life to that God in September of 1988. And that God has changed me over those years. That God will change you too. All you have to do is give your life to Him. Let Him guide you, protect you, sustain you, and show you what it means to be created in the image of the Creator of all things. So this morning, remember God as together we stand and sing.